I am at once the sky, the earth, the animals, and the spirits around me. I live sustainably and am a part of the naturally occurring processes of this world. Every day I gain knowledge of the heavens simply by breathing, by seeing, and by experiencing. I am but a single bead in the necklace of time. All I know has all too suddenly stopped progressing forward, like a wild boar who has been speared, who will wander the forest no more. We have been captured by our neighbors, who used to trade and collaborate with us, and dragged across the sands towards some unknown fate. Acts of war made upon people who wish none of it, who do not deserve such pain. I am held cramped here, with many peoples, being constantly inspected and judged. Some of us are taken away, some of us stay, and others perish. Today my time has come to be purchased and sentenced to a life of uncertainty and servitude. My life, my hands, their missions.
Shackled to my fellow African, I was shoved under deck like an animal. The overwhelming stench was grotesque. Flies filled the air, and it was nearly impossible to breathe without inhaling one. There were hundreds of men, women, and children, not all from my village, that filled this small hall. Space was so tight you could only stand if you were less than 4 feet tall. The cramped conditions forced us to lie down in a head-to-toe arrangement at all times. Any time I was forced above deck, the sunlight burned my eyes compared to the dark hall. The crew usually threw some food and rice and yams down the slave deck opening once a day. It was a fight for food, a battle against starvation. The ones near the opening get the most food, while the weaker ones, the women and children, had to eat small morsels that fell to the floor. The cramped quarters make sleeping nearly impossible. Nightly, my head is rammed into my neighbor's thigh, a very unpleasant feeling. The heat and humidity in this hall is unbearable. The shackles are digging into my skin. Any resistance to the captor's words, and the whips come out. I do not know where I am going or how long it will take, but I hope it comes to an end soon.
Our captors herded us onto their ship and began forcing everyone down below decks. I heard the wail of a woman as her child was torn from her arms while the sailors laughed at her agony. As my head disappeared under the hatch, the smell of vomit and rotting wood assailed my senses. It was dark, so dark, and the air was stifling hot. Taking hold of the shackles that bound us, a burly white man led our miserable forms through the darkness of moans and screams. Slowly, my eyes began to adjust to the darkness, and I saw the horror that surrounded me. My fellow captives had been bound hand and foot in long rows across wooden shelves meant for housing shipping cargo. With barely any room to move their arms or legs, many of the prisoners jostled against each other in a desperate attempt to escape their cramped confinement. The man in front of me halted abruptly, and I realized that the burly man was now ordering the slaves to lie down on an empty shelf. Those who refused or hesitated were whipped or beaten into place. As my back hit the hard, unforgiving wooden surface, I heard a distant grumbling and felt a sudden lurch as the ship began to move forwards. Realizing that my last hope of returning home had evaporated, I wept bitterly. Weeks passed, and I grew to hate the conditions of the ship ever more. The uncirculated air became even more rancid by the nauseating smell of vomit and sweat. Many of the captives had begun to show signs of sickness. Every day the sailors came down to retrieve and remove the dead bodies from the hold. Food was handed out twice a day by our captors from a metal bucket. I could barely stomach the gruesome slime, but swallowed it knowing that I would starve if I did not. As the weeks dissolved into months, I pondered the meaning of my existence and asked God if he meant for me to die like this.
Through the cracks of the deck, we can see the black night sky, peppered with the lights of the stars. Waves are crashing, but all else is silent. Slowly, we creep towards the hatch that leads from the lower deck to the upper deck. We follow each other, one by one, as to cope with the chains linking us together. On my signal, we begin making our way upon the deck. I make sure that everyone is as quiet as can be so we do not alarm the crew. Once we are all on deck, we begin spreading out. I make my way towards the crew member who is supposed to be on guard, but is instead sleeping. With the help of 2 people on either side of me, we cover his mouth and use our chains to strangle him. Unfortunately, the clanging of the chains causes one of the crew members to become suspicious. He rounds the corner, seeing all of us, cries for the others. Suddenly, gunshots ring throughout the eerie night. We quickly lose our element of surprise. Soon, they have surrounded us, guns aimed at our heads. I decide that we are better off jumping off the boat. Without giving any of my neighbors time to consider the idea, I run to the side of the boat and jump into the water. The weight of my body drags the others chained to me into the water. We begin sinking. Initially, some of the others freak out. However, most of the others understand my actions. Although we are sinking to our deaths, we are returning to Africa, the homeland. Hopefully, we will all live a better life when we are reborn to compensate for this horrible sequence of events.
And one day, the ship stopped for good. We had arrived at our destination. As the white men led us up to the ship's deck, we stumbled as we were greeted by the sun's blinding rays and an overwhelming gust of fresh air and salt water. Up ahead, we could see more white men awaiting our arrival. They looked excited, as if they were ready to run on board and snatch us up. But they remained in place. Just seeing them brought up mixed emotions, anxiety, fear, confusion, curiosity, and we continued walking, still chained together, into the new world.